The G.I. Joe universe has a whole lot of characters and a whole lot of diversity. We've got our silent ninja and his tragic backstory, a silver-faced weapons dealer, and the leader of them all who's actually just a car salesman in some continuities. But then you have some characters who don't get such expansive backstory, chosen one type origins, or tragic twists and turns. They almost feel like they've always existed in the universe, and that's Roadblock for you. He's the G.I. Joe team's heavy hitter, the big guy, the muscle of the team. But he's also kind of like the glue that holds the team together. And when you start digging into all the continuities to understand his origins, you realize, as I did throughout this process, that they're all fragmented. All we get are a few glimpses here and there. More often than not, Roadblock is actually defined by the things he does instead of where he came from. And that's arguably the most interesting thing about him. But before we even get into the comics, cartoons, and movies, we have to talk about the classic file card version, because that is where the Roadblock blueprint actually begins. His real name is Marvin F. Hinton. He comes from Biloxi, Mississippi, and his official role is infantry heavy weapons, with Cook as his secondary specialty. That one detail basically gives us Roadblock forever, a gourmet chef's heart inside the body of a walking heavy weapons platform. He wanted to be a chef, he could handle the biggest guns on the battlefield, and somehow both sides of that personality work together. Then there is one version that puts him front and center. What is it? Well, I'm glad you want to know, because we're here today to cover every major origin, every reinvention, the comics, the cartoons, the live action version, all of it. And by the end of this video, you genuinely will not need another Roadblock breakdown again. So sit back, get comfortable, grab a snack, it's going to be a long ride, and let's get started. Marvel Comics origin. Roadblock enters the war at General Flag's funeral. We'll start off with the OG Marvel Comics, Larry Hama version of Roadblock, who pretty much sets the foundation for this character. So let me walk you through his very first appearances. In issue number 22 of G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, the Joes gather at Arlington National Cemetery for General Flag's funeral. It's your usual military funeral with army personnel in formation, some on horses, and General Flag being carried by a horse-drawn carriage. Super sober and super respectful. And in the midst of it, Cobra sets up an attack using a Cobra Rattler, ready to launch missiles straight at the funeral. All that's left is 5 seconds, then 4, 3, 2, 1, and boom! Someone takes down the Rattler right from the sky. It's none other than Roadblock standing with Duke. And it's in this panel that we realize Roadblock is the heavy machinery guy. He's the new heavy machine gunner of the G.I. Joe team, while Duke steps in as the new top sergeant presence beside him. Roadblock helps shoot down the Rattler using a .50 caliber Browning, a gun probably as big as my height, and the man holds it like it weighs nothing. Even as he stands next to Duke, his stature and build set him apart. Like, geez, no doubt they got The Rock to play him. But we'll come to that later. So Roadblock is the new heavy machine gunner on the G.I. Joe team, and his teammates are instantly impressed, calling him the baddest dude on the block. But Roadblock's response is what will really surprise you. He says that he'd rather make crepes and bake soufflés than fight. Ah, he's just a little softy behind that tough exterior. A direct opposite to Duke and his hard-hitting, serious persona. What a duo, right? And that's that. From the next issue onward, Roadblock feels like he has already become part of the team's core lineup. Duke and he are pretty much already a solid pair as they track Major Blood's movements from a cafe across from his hotel. And of course, Roadblock has to comment on how the food is just mediocre and inedible to someone with a cultured palate. Throughout the issue, my guy just complains to the poor waiters. G.I. Joe? Nah, this guy should have been in MasterChef, living it up with Gordon Ramsay. But after a lot of trailing and tracking, Baroness, Major Blood, and Cobra Commander all end up in that very cafe, and we have a final showdown where Roadblock once again whips out his .50 caliber Browning and shoots the hell out of everyone. He even swings around the gun like it's nothing, knocking out people left and right. Even Storm Shadow enters the mix, and Duke and Roadblock straight away pounce on him and Major Blood. It all ends up in a chase where Roadblock is aboard the Vamp. Eventually, they do succeed in the mission and capture Cobra Commander, but we all know that ain't gonna last. The Roadblock-Duke partnership grows through issues 24 and 25, as we continue to see Roadblock be an absolute menace with his machine guns, and yet somehow still controlled, precise, and calm under pressure. Now, what's interesting about all this is that Marvel never rushes to tell us about Roadblock's past or his childhood or anything like that, but his identity is built through his presence and his function. He arrives at a moment of grief, loss, and mourning, but proves to the team why he belongs with them. And that feels real, you know? Because in real life, when do we ever get someone's life story or background the moment we meet them? Instead, we see him as a useful and almost essential member of the team, proving his worth from the very first appearance. Sunbow cartoon origin. The rhyming heavy gunner becomes a Saturday morning icon. Oh, now the Sunbow cartoons bring a whole new flavor to this character. As grounded as Roadblock was in the A Real American Hero continuity, here he's all energy and personality. He's voiced by Keen Holiday, and his major appearance is in the Revenge of Cobra miniseries. The miniseries starts off with the Joes, including Roadblock, who's flying one of the choppers looking for signs of Cobra as they head to headquarters. And they're attacked by Cobra. Duh. But surprise, surprise, Cobra actually manages to do something useful and captures Duke and Snake Eyes. Of course, the commander himself gets caught by the Joes, and Roadblock is ready to use him as bait to rescue his homies, Duke and Snake Eyes. But they've got to somehow survive Destro's new invention, the Weather Dominator. And surely, Roadblock and Flint get caught in the pit of chaos in a ruthless wind tornado and fall right to the bottom. But little did they know Destro had seeded yet another one of his weird inventions in the pit of chaos. These were small, dried-up vines that, when activated with water, could strangle pretty much anyone with a grip of steel. And that's exactly what happens in the pit, as Flint and Roadblock are taken over by the deadly vines that get activated by the rainwater. But Roadblock keeps managing to fend them off with his knife and his strength, until they manage to make their way to the crash remains and somehow get a makeshift jet working. This is when Roadblock yet again proves himself to be a team player who's also scrappy as hell. He gathers all the fuel needed to run the makeshift aerial device they created from the remains. But on liftoff, Roadblock is hanging from the edge, and the vines catch on to his feet. He knows if he holds on and if the Joes wait for him to break free, they will run out of fuel and never make it out of here. So he does what any loyal team player would do. He tells them to make it back to the surface as he lets go and falls back into the pit of darkness that had been overtaken by those deadly vines by then. I guess he was confident that he would break his way through the vines, and honestly, I didn't doubt it either. Have you seen the guy? And he does indeed manage to survive the vines. This incident really shows how loyal as well as strong Roadblock truly is. I mean, my guy literally climbed out of the pit of darkness only to be faced by huge wild cats that low-key almost looked like lionesses. But bro survives it all and ends up on a truck belonging to Honda Lu that had been taken over by Cobra. Little did he know the trucks were taking him straight to Cobra's temple. Now, although he absolutely does not want to get caught dead in Cobra Temple, he does take the opportunity to sneak right into the headquarters. He sees Cobra Commander losing his mind and ambushes him. Roadblock literally picks up the commander like he's an action figurine and throws him across the room. He single-handedly fights through Cobra's forces before finally getting overwhelmed and captured. From there, they are taken to the arena of sport, where he's finally reunited with Duke and Snake Eyes. The commander orders some weird endgame in the arena that the four of them then have to survive. And Roadblock is the one who inspires their winning idea. Clearly, this guy isn't just all brawn and no brain. The four of them then make their way through the underground tunnels out of Cobra Temple, but not before Roadblock swipes a few of those scrawny vines to stick up Cobra's nose. I totally love this guy's personality in this series. And with those vines, he manages to stop both Cobra Commander and Destro, allowing the other Joes to take down the rest of the enemies. He's just that essential to the team. Apart from this miniseries, he was also front and center in the episode Red Rocket's Glare. In fact, here we get to see a little more of Roadblock and his personal life than just his function as a Joe. The episode opens with him in the jungle, and boy does he hate bugs and snakes. But once that mission is over, it's all chilling for him as they get 2 weeks of rest and recreation to hang out at the coast and sample the local cuisine. In fact, they are immediately heading to Roadblock's aunt and uncle's new restaurant to taste his Uncle Caleb's cooking. But it turns out his uncle and aunt have opened up a Red Rocket drive-in, and they seem super worried about the bills they've got to pay. The three of them, Caleb, Sarah, and Marvin, which is Roadblock's real name, have a nice little reunion until finally Caleb and Sarah tell Roadblock what's been up with their outlet. Turns out they had bought the place with their retirement money and initially had customers flying in and out. But then somebody started scaring all the people away. Now, of course, Roadblock immediately jumps into action to take on the bunch of goons on bikes and temporarily scares them away. Of course, the real question here is, why the hell do these bikers want to scare a hamburger joint? and how the hell are they getting their hands on laser pistols? Turns out they work for Tomax and Zammot, who then order Mr. Quig, another one of their henchmen, to buy back the drive-in from Sarah and Caleb, aka the Bronsons, and use extreme measures if necessary. And by then, Roadblock already has more Joes by his side, including Lady J, Flint, and Cutter. Of course, he can handle Mr. Quig all by himself and throws him out of there. But Cobra fires lasers and blasts up the entire joint. Now, the reason why I bring up this episode is because it shows us a civilian side of Roadblock that we never get to see. The fact that he too has a family, an uncle and aunt, for whom he'd probably do anything. It all just makes him human. And by the end of the episode, when the Joes have won, we see Roadblock just cooking up barbecue and some fresh ribs on a grill with his aunt and uncle, having renamed their restaurant the Joe's Place. We also get to hear his iconic rhymes. And trust me, it isn't gimmicky at all. I know it sounds weird, a guy who rhymes after combat, but that's definitely one of my favorite things about Roadblock in this continuity. He's got rhyme, rhythm, and humor without being reduced to comic relief. He's the whole package, guys. Like the guy who'd protect you and then cook you dinner after. Now, by the time we reach G.I. Joe the movie in 1987, the whole scenery and storyline shift drastically. We go from grounded military adventure to full biological mythic badness with Cobra La and Serpentor. But Roadblock is like the one constant. He is still his classic Sunbow personality. And even though the movie doesn't reinvent his origin, it gives him one of his biggest Sunbow era showcases. Roadblock follows Cobra into Cobra La, gets captured, escapes after being temporarily blinded by Nemesis Enforcer, and even ends up wandering through the snow with the mutated Cobra Commander before helping the Joes find their way back into the final fight. No new origin or anything, because he is already a well-established and beloved character by then. He's pretty much one of the faces of the team by the end of the Sunbow era. So the story evolved and the world got weirder, but Roadblock still didn't get over his love for gourmet food. And I think that really says something about how solid Roadblock and his story had become by then. UK Action Force origin. The French Congo Roadblock variant. The UK Action Force toy series once again switches things up. In this version, from the little we get to know from the toy card, Roadblock isn't an American character any longer. Instead, his birthplace is listed as the French Congo. Crazy, right? Like, if you heard or read that elsewhere, you'd have to fact check it. But yeah, this version was an official one before Action Force merged more tightly with the American G.I. Joe branding. Interestingly though, this version of Roadblock doesn't fully replace Marvin Hinton from Biloxi, Mississippi. It works more like an international file card profile variation than a full replacement of the American Marvin Hinton version. And eventually, as the lines merged, the UK profile was adjusted to match the American version. The Action Force version of Roadblock was also, of course, very different from the Sunbow version. This guy was a man of few words, but some things still stuck. This Roadblock was still a gourmet chef who could probably handle a machine gun almost as well as he handled his flavors. And of course, he was loyal, dependable, and fearless as always. And I kind of love that this version exists, especially since it's so lesser known. It really shows you how flexible Roadblock's character was and how different continuities played around with it, and yet the core remained the same. Devil's Due origin, continuation. Roadblock becomes a chef again. I'm sure we all know that Devil's Due sees the G.I. Joes disband for a while and remain inactive. The Joes return to their normal civilian lives, and only when Cobra rises again does the team have to band together one more time. But this gives us the opportunity to see Roadblock in the profession that he was absolutely meant to be in. Yep, guys, he took this time off and became a chef, like a real one, not just a hobby. And I could just imagine how happy he must have been, man. But of course, he's called right back. Issue number 1 kicks off with Cobra Commander resurfacing and the US government declaring that enough is enough. It's time to bring G.I. Joe back into the action. It had been 7 years since the team had worked together. 7 years of normal lives and side jobs. But now they were back once again under the leadership of Duke, almost like veterans coming out of retirement. And of course, Roadblock is immediately on board because, in his own words, the man wants to bash some snakeskin. And I love that about him. 7 years and he still can't stand that slimy Snake. And the reunion scenes are honestly some of my favorite Roadblock material. Flint's there, Scarlet's there, Snake Eyes is there, and it low-key feels like old friends reuniting. Of course, they do the work stuff as Duke reacquaints them with their enemies, tells them the basics, and asks them to report for duty on Monday with all their paperwork, medical exams, and of course, the physical. Clearly, you could fight terrorists and save the world on multiple occasions and still not escape administrative paperwork. But the moment the meeting wraps up, Roadblock, being who he is, asks the boys if they want to go grab a drink and catch up on almost an entire decade. Oh, they are so back. In fact, they even set up a home to prepare for their upcoming mission, and they sit and discuss what went down with Snake Eyes and Scarlet's wedding. Clearly, these guys like some gossip, and hey, no shame in that. These are the scenes when the team is just chilling, joking, and hanging out that make you realize exactly why G.I. Joe works. Then issue number 2 reminds you exactly why Roadblock became such an icon. He takes up his OG role as the big machine gunner and is part of the squad for their first attack against Cobra. But he's more than the big guy. He's a mentor now. With all these new recruits and cadets in combat, he's constantly emphasizing teamwork and checking where everybody is, noticing immediately if someone falls behind or gets hurt, and even telling the others to stay aware of the squad at all times. It's small stuff, and it really shows the experience he has. And when one of the new cadets gets shot and falls, you can see Roadblock's honest and raw emotional reaction. Then in issue number 3, Roadblock is seen fighting the Dreadnoks and Major Blood. They take down every last one of them, but Snake Eyes and Scarlet are unfortunately still on their own. And things just don't feel right, you know? Like, it almost feels too easy the way the Dreadnoks and Cobra forces are falling. It feels like an easy win, except it isn't. It is actually a trap set up by Cobra and Major Blood. Blood triggers a blast that infects the Joes with nanomites, including Roadblock himself. We see that big giant of a man just helplessly lying in a hospital bed with the rest of the infected in the Joe headquarters. Fortunately, the Joes eventually manage to rewrite the nanomite programming and stop the infection before it completely destroys them. And Roadblock does indeed recover along with the others. And by the end of the arc, we see Roadblock back to his cooking ways, grilling up a nice hot meal for himself and the Joes. Turns out, his chef gig had been doing really well, and he flew the entire team down to the land he owns. Another storyline that we absolutely have to discuss is what goes down in G.I. Joe Frontline issue number 18. Here, Roadblock is no longer just a heavy machine gunner. He is also a live cooking show host. Yep, he has his own cooking TV show, which is shot in none other than Los Angeles, California. His show is called Kiss Your Mama Home Cookin' with Marvin Hinton, and boy is he particular and demanding. If he wants spoons, you have to get him spoons. He does not mess with plastic sporks, but of course the show is on a budget and whatnot. He does have a pretty strict producer-manager, I must say. But anyway, he starts off the show with chicken dumplings and Mama's sweet pecan pie. Unfortunately, his show is not all that great, and people watch it because it's terrible, so that they can make fun of it the whole time. You see, he may be a good cook, but he clearly isn't a TV personality. He even has a Rhyme of the Day segment. But then, 2 weeks later, he enters the set to see a bunch of boxes full of spoons and whatnot. And as happy as he is, it does feel a little fishy to him. But his producer tells him to just embrace the fact that they're a big show now, and that he has a new co-host, Mona Butcher. In the meanwhile, Mainframe is trying to trace a money laundering scam headed by Tomax and Xamot, who have been feeding money into a dummy corporation. And turns out, they are actually relocating their money through a television network, the same one that employs Roadblock and his cooking show. Of course, once the Joes find out, they inform federal authorities, who would bust Tomax and Xamot at Extensive Enterprises in a little over 2 hours. So what do? Well, they decide to destroy all evidence, both digitally from the system as well as the physical evidence, which basically means Roadblock. So they send the Dreadnoks to take him down, but little do they know the might of Roadblock. He takes down all of them with style and even ends it with a nice little ad for the Marvin Hinton Grill. Of course, the mysterious investors, who were not all that mysterious, back out, and all the money is gone. But the show becomes a huge hit and everyone wants to buy the Marvin Hinton Grill. So the show is retooled to be Cooking with Kung Fu Grip, and he is going to be an action cook, fighting a new evil every episode. Low-key, his dream job, man. IDW Origins version, Roadblock and Heavy Duty become a family dynamic. Now, this version once again gives us a little different backstory for Roadblock, who's known here as Sergeant Marvin Hinton, as it shows how he gets inducted into G.I. Joe through his cousin, Sergeant Lamont Morris, better known as Heavy Duty. and we get to see the whole story unfold in IDW's G.I. Joe Origins number 11, also known as The Origin of Roadblock. The comic opens with Roadblock, aka Marvin, in the U.S. Army Communications Electronics Command at Fort Aberdeen. He's playing an Army-created team-building video game with his cousin Lamont, who you all might know better as Heavy Duty. Yep, we've got two big machine gunners battling it out in a video game, and goddamn, they cannot stop bickering for even 1 second. Roadblock threatens Lamont to start pulling his weight or he'll frag him, and Lamont retorts by saying that he's got a record-setting chain of headshot kills. And their insults? Literally like two teenagers. I kid you not, Lamont says, "I thought the Army created this stupid game for, like, team building, not nanny building." Sounds like they're in 5th grade, man. Their bickering gets even worse when they are ambushed by a huge Transformers mecha-looking enemy that neither of them saw coming. And, of course, their first instinct is to blame one another and call each other names. Typical sibling energy. But then Lamont shows up with a weapon that's almost his size and saves their asses. Turns out the game just had a new patch added that allows players to customize weapons. Clearly Lamont knows more about the ins and outs of the game than the army-savvy tech guy Marvin. Of course, Marvin isn't actually the tech guy. He's only in the tech department and playing the game because it's a temporary reassignment since he had gotten shot in the line of duty by an insurgent. And now he is waiting to get the green signal from the doctors to be redeployed. And then he'll be gone, off to real action. No more Mario business. But Lamont ain't buying it at all. He jokingly taunts Marvin and says he's just jealous and challenges him to a deathmatch. All this totally reminds me of Warzone, not gonna lie. But past all that bickering and playful taunting, you see their brotherly relationship here, as Lamont thanks Marvin for setting him up with the game because he's bored out of his mind in his classified hosting location. You see, Roadblock is being his usual self and chefing it up in the mess because he thinks the marinara sauce is weak as hell, when suddenly he is called up by his superior and informed that his cousin, Sergeant Lamont A. Morris, was killed that morning in the line of duty. He can't give Marvin too many details since Lamont's posting was classified, but apparently Lamont laid down his life so that others could live when the team was overwhelmed by superior numbers while taking down an enemy position. He showed extraordinary bravery and courage and would be nominated for the Medal of Honor. Marvin then has to break the news to his family and even go through his funeral. Then, the next day, he sits down to play Sigma 6, and you can almost see his heart breaking at having to play alone. But then, in the game, he suddenly comes across Heavy Duty, aka Lamont, who leaves the game almost immediately. And obviously, Marvin doesn't know what to believe or what the hell is happening. So he goes to LaCroix and asks him if he could locate the actual location of a Sigma 6 player based on their IP address. Of course, LaCroix is hesitant since that would require like 250 different rule violations, because that information is supposed to be private. But Marvin is prepared. He bribes LaCroix with a delicious bowl of Gulf shrimp in beer and butter sauce and gets the location in return. Turns out it's an Army IP connected to a base in Nowhere, Nevada that had been decommissioned long ago. With that info, Roadblock sets out on a journey to that base, chasing the ghost of his cousin. Now, the moment he enters the facility, he's faced by Snake Eyes, but even his ninja tiger claw moves can't stop the literal roadblock that Marvin is. Instead, Marvin headbutts Snake Eyes into oblivion. He's eventually taken down by an arrow delivering an electric shock and put in a cell of sorts. He introduces himself as Sergeant Marvin F. Hinton, but these guys already know everything about him and are pretty pissed that he's broken into a ghost facility. Of course, he tries explaining his background as a heavy machine gunner and his connection to Sergeant Lamont, but they ain't interested in listening. And that's when we get to see Heavy Duty, aka Lamont, alive and kicking. He's the one who suggests they give Marvin a job, and they explain that his in-game call sign was Roadblock. So that's how Sergeant Marvin becomes Roadblock in this continuity. We also get to see a little more about his family, which is always nice. IDW, a Real American Hero continuation. The veteran Roadblock returns. Now, IDW also continued the original Larry Hama style, A Real American Hero continuity, but did switch things up a little in issues 156 to 160. Here, Cobra was no longer just a hidden terrorist group. Instead, it had rebranded itself as a massive public-facing paramilitary movement, while the Joes were framed as a rogue secret military unit. Issue 156 opens with a panel saying that another bank robbery by anarchist terrorists had been thwarted by vigilant Cobra troopers. Wow, what a role reversal, huh? In fact, the G.I. Joes are also branded as a secret US military special operations unit gone rogue, supporting the terrorists. And of course, the public is buying it all up, except we know that isn't the whole picture. Now in this context, our first glimpse of Roadblock, aka Marvin Hinton, is once again in a kitchen as he's chopping up some ribs with a cleaver. He's no longer the humorous rhyming guy we saw in Sunbow. Oh no, he's serious as hell, and almost looks scary with that cleaver in hand, especially when approached by Cobra crooks in suits. And God knows what he does with them, but all we know is that he takes care of it and gets ready to respond to Duke's call. The fact that he's the team's machine gunner hasn't changed either. Not long after, we see him blow up the block with his guns and bullets alongside Rock and Roll and his OG buddy Duke, as they fight a whole army of bats, which are Cobra battle android troopers. He helps the Joes fire at Cobra and keep them busy, while Mainframe hacks into their systems. G.I. Joe Resolute Origin, the deadlier, sharper Roadblock. For those of you who have watched G.I. Joe Resolute, you know how it shifted the tone drastically from its Saturday morning cartoon vibes. It became much darker, much more real, with people genuinely dying, blood and all. And I think the change in the animation style also added to this more adult feel. It didn't feel like kids' animation, but was much more realistic, like dark anime vibes, you know? G.I. Joe Resolute began as a darker, adult animated project and was later presented in movie-length form. So it only makes sense that Roadblock 2 was more mature, intense, and adult-toned. His profile was still the same, with him being a gourmet chef and manhandling an M250 caliber Browning, but he left his rhyming days behind, that's for sure. Now, the story follows Cobra posing a brand new threat to the world as they prepare particle cannons all over the world and even demolish Moscow using a particle cannon. Cobra proves the threat by wiping Moscow off the map with a particle weapon, instantly making Resolute feel deadlier than the Saturday morning version. Resolute ain't kidding around, guys. This project shows real consequences. Now, Roadblock enters the picture when the G.I. Joe base is bombed. Someone blows up their armory and destroys every vehicle, device, and gun. The Joes, including Duke, Stalker, Roadblock, and others, gather around a round table to figure out what happened and who the hell managed to pull this off. Roadblock informs them that Bazooka was the security detail during that shift, but lo and behold, he had been killed and hit. But that's the least of their problems, as Roadblock informs them that all satellite communications are down everywhere, and that something is happening in New York. What? Oh, nothing much, just Cobra invading a UN meeting with a holographic projection of the commander bombing and destroying Moscow to bits. Yep, keeping it casual, just another Tuesday. Now, this is when the Joes split up into teams, and Roadblock joins Gung Ho, Stalker, and Beachhead. They put together the remaining pieces of what's happening and how Cobra is running such a massive operation. Turns out there's a HARP array in Alaska that has been taken over by enemy forces and is being used to superheat the ionosphere, and Roadblock and his team have got to go and take it back. Soon we see that the HARP research station has actually been taken over by none other than Destro and Baroness, who have taken all the scientists hostage. Now, our team of Joes, including Roadblock, uses thermal binoculars to identify exactly where Baroness and Destro are holding the hostages. And Roadblock has a plan for how to reach and infiltrate the facility. You see, it's actually quite genius. Being stealthy and surprising them wouldn't work because they would see them coming from a mile away. So instead, they go in guns blazing, making a whole lot of noise and letting them know they're here. And surely they drop grenades, which distract the guards long enough for Roadblock to get behind them and shoot them down. Eventually, they make it right into the facility, somehow escaping and avoiding the charges blown up by Baroness and Destro. They had mined the entire freaking corridor. Crazy, right? And of course, Baroness immediately threatens the hostages and tells them to get the hell out of the facility. But Roadblock takes things into his own hands. After all, there's not a gun in the world that he is not trained on. You see, when Baroness and Destro are distracted in conversation, Roadblock through the corridor of smoke takes a clear shot straight at Destro's head. He falls to the floor as the bullet ricochets off his silver mask, and Roadblock and his teammates come out walking like they've already won the battle, shooting their guns without a care in the world. In the meanwhile, the other Joes help the hostages escape through underground tunnels. And voila! What a smart plan. They even stun bomb Baroness and Destro and arrest both at gunpoint. Mission accomplished. In the meanwhile, the rest of the Joes are also successful, and they all end up in Springfield for the final battle, where they successfully defeat Cobra yet again. What I like about this continuity is that it doesn't feel the need to reinvent Roadblock or give him some new funky storyline like a television cooking show. Instead, they take the age-old blueprint, change the tone, and show us a whole different side to a man we all thought we knew. And that's the magic. G.I. Joe Renegades Origin, the fugitive soldier under the hood of a car. In G.I. Joe Renegades, the storyline changes significantly since in this continuity, Cobra is once again not exactly a secret terrorist organization. Instead, it has rebranded as Cobra Industries, which is apparently a benevolent company that you can trust. They describe themselves as a company that cares for every man, woman, and child on the planet as they accelerate global communications, innovate advanced medicines, and modernize defense technologies. Now, of course, you and I aren't really buying it. And it turns out there's one more person who isn't easy to fool. We'll get into it, don't worry. But where does Roadblock fit into all this? Well, we see him for the first time in the very first episode, which begins with Duke handing Roadblock a gun and asking him to hold back the Cobra troopers. And oh boy, does he slide on the ground in style, pick up the weapon, and go ham. But wait, let's start from the very beginning. Scarlet, aka Lieutenant O'Hara, who usually works at a desk, has some suspicious and unnerving intel on Cobra Industries, for which she forms a security detail team. Of course, it includes Duke, Ripcord, Tunnel Rat, and our very beloved Roadblock. We see Corporal Hinton, aka Roadblock, working under a car as he's listening and jamming to music when he's approached by Lady J with the mission details. And the moment he sees her, he tries to salute with a wrench in his hand and accidentally bangs his head. Oops. I guess this Roadblock does lean a little into the whole comic relief bit. Definitely more than the Resolute version, that's for sure. Now, all four of them hop onto a helicopter with Lieutenant O'Hara, aka Scarlet, as she briefs them a little. Turns out they're going to the Cobra Pharmaceuticals manufacturing plant, where they've been called in to investigate a terrorist threat. Of course, Scarlet also wants to gather enough proof to show the world and General Abernathy that Cobra is evil. But the Joes aren't convinced yet. Interestingly, in this continuity, these guys aren't exactly G.I. Joe members or anything, so they technically don't have their classic codenames yet. In this version, Roadblock feels less like a traditional file card identity and more like a nickname that naturally fits him. He is the giant mechanic, driver, and muscle who physically becomes the obstacle Cobra can't move. Okay, now back to the story. The moment they enter the facility, they're instantly ambushed by a whole bunch of armed men and end up in a brawl that turns into a gunfight. And this is exactly where the episode started. Of course, slowly and surely, as the team makes its way through the facility, they find a creepy basement there containing biovipers. They also come face to face with Mindbender, who is currently wanted by the feds. Naturally, he unleashes his bioviper slimy inventions on the team, who now have to fight a monster-like creature that isn't affected by bullets or swords. Went from car mechanic to soldier real quick. What a day for Roadblock. But hey, he still remains a team player as he protects Duke and even saves Ripcord from falling off. And as Mindbender drowns the five of them, including Snake Eyes, in his biomatrix, Tunnel Rat, who had hidden in the vents, comes back and frees them. They once again fight the biomatrix creatures, and we see Roadblock quite literally punch through one. Unfortunately, Ripcord doesn't make it out with them, and the rest escape aboard a Cobra military-grade van driven by Roadblock. Now, here's the twist. The entire team, including Scarlet, is branded as terrorists. So they become the Renegades and take on the role of fugitives who are running from the government they once served. And that's how the first episode ends. What I find noteworthy here is that Roadblock is not exactly just the machine gunner, but also the mechanical and technical guy of the team. He's working on the car, driving the truck, and whatnot. I actually enjoy that little expansion to his character. The second episode picks up from there as Roadblock and the rest commemorate their fallen teammate Ripcord and say a few words in his honor. Funnily enough, Roadblock is still a foodie and a cook here, as he takes on the role of procuring and cooking food for the team. And he's back to his usual self, cutting up mushrooms, boiling up a stew, and jamming to music with earphones on. Never mind that they almost died just a few hours earlier. And as it turns out, the mushrooms he was cooking with were poisonous. Thank God for Tunnel Rat, or else Roadblock would have probably killed them all. Eventually, the entire team once again has to fight off the biovipers unleashed by Mindbender on a civilian town, and we get to see Roadblock go back to his OG roots of handling the biggest weapons in the team. But I think his most significant storyline in Renegades comes during episode 16, called Shipwrecked. You see, in this episode, the Joes have collected a canister of evidence, aka the bioviper goo, from a Cobra lab, and they have escaped all thanks to Roadblock's insane driving skills. But they need some help transporting it, so they enlist Sea Captain Shipwreck to secure them safe passage on his ship, which he calls Courtney. But he clearly realizes that whatever it is they're transporting must be a lot of trouble, and he won't ask any questions as long as he gets paid. But of course, these guys have literally been on the run and have no money whatsoever, so they strike a deal. For helping transport them, he wants their armored truck. Now obviously, Roadblock does not like that at all. He's become pretty attached to the truck, his Coyote, that's what he has named it. But they just have no choice. So he hands over the keys and they board the ship. The canister is frozen and stored, but of course, things go wrong. The canister manages to unfreeze and reveals a Techno-Viper that drains electric energy and starts feeding off the ship's power sources as well. It grows to like 10 times its size, and the Joes have to stop it before it becomes even more powerful. They pretty much decide that they've got to sink the ship to stop the Techno-Viper. Before doing that though, they try one last time to push that thing off the ship, but to no avail. And this time the Viper makes its way straight into Coyote the truck, takes over it, and starts firing everywhere. So left with no choice, Roadblock makes the heroic decision to get in the truck, drive it off the ship, and sink it along with the Techno-Viper. But fortunately, Shipwreck manages to net his truck and pull him out of the water. He's also so impressed and humbled by Roadblock's instinct to sacrifice himself that he returns his truck to him. I love this episode because it sticks to the classic traits of Roadblock. No matter the continuity, he always puts his team before himself. And now, last but not least, we've got live-action Roadblock. Dwayne Johnson turns him into the new field leader. Okay, now in the live-action movies, Roadblock isn't actually around in the first film, G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra from 2009. Instead, Heavy Duty takes on the big weapons guy role, though the movie does not clearly frame him as Roadblock's cousin here. But then, in the second film, G.I. Joe: Retaliation from 2013, that's when Roadblock really comes to life. He's played by none other than Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. So the film begins with the G.I. Joe team carrying out some dangerous missions under Duke's leadership as usual. The Roadblock is introduced as Duke's very trusted friend and battle partner, and he's played almost perfectly by The Rock, who manages to strike a balance between professionalism and light humor here and there. Early in the film, the team is sent on a mission involving Pakistani nuclear warheads, and although the team does successfully complete the mission, they find out that they have been betrayed by someone in the US government. Of course, we already know that it's the President of the United States, who is actually Zartan in disguise, but because of the betrayal, they're ambushed by an airstrike that kills Duke and most of the Joes. Only Roadblock, Flint, and Lady J survive by diving into a well and taking cover before the missiles hit. And once they come out of the rubble, nothing remains the same. Roadblock knows that he has to step up and take on the role of de facto leader of the Joes. Never mind the fact that he is devastated by his friend's death and wants nothing more than revenge against Cobra. But once he steps into the leadership role, he knows he can't just be ruled by emotions. All of them naturally go underground since they have been branded as state enemies, and they ask General Colton, aka Bruce Willis, for help. He arms the team and helps them find out that Zartan is impersonating the president. And then comes the final resistance. Roadblock, Snake Eyes, Jinx, Flint, and Lady J band together to stop Cobra's Project Zeus. And during the final battle at Fort Sumter, Roadblock takes on Firefly, who is Cobra's explosives expert. Now, you can imagine how explosive, pun intended, the fight must have been, considering it involved Dwayne Johnson. The two brawl it out, and Roadblock finally defeats Firefly and uses the launch controls to destroy the Zeus weapons. Now, the most important moment for Roadblock's storyline, in my opinion, comes at the very end of the film, when he's basically officially recognized as Duke's successor. General Colton presents Roadblock with General Patton's M1911 pistol and tells him to use it to hunt down Cobra Commander. And in the final moments of the film, Roadblock fires a single shot from the pistol into the air as a tribute to all his fallen Joes, especially Duke. This is when we see him at last transform and embrace the role of leader. Final thoughts. And oh my, what a journey we've had with this character. From machine gun expert to leader of the Joes, Roadblock deserves every bit of it. Whether your favorite show is the Sunbow version, where he speaks in rhymes and shoots in style, or the darker, more serious Resolute version, a few things remain constant. He's always as loyal as they come. No matter what happens, Roadblock never fails to be a team player. And when his hands aren't holding huge machine guns, they're usually stirring a pot or grilling up some barbecue. That's Roadblock for you. Now tell us, which of these versions is your favorite? Let us know in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to smash the like button and subscribe to the channel for more such G.I. Joe content. Yo, Joe! We'll see you guys soon.